Is the U.S. China deal actually sealed? Well, the details are a bit sketchy. President Trump Wednesday announced a new trade deal framework between the U.S. and China.
In a Truth Social post, Trump wrote, "Our deal with China is done, subject to final approval with President Xi and me. Full magnets and any necessary rare earths will be supplied upfront by China. Likewise, we will provide to China what was agreed to, including Chinese students using our colleges and universities, which has always been good with me. We are getting a total of 55% tariffs. China is getting 10%. Relationship is excellent."
The agreement came after 2 days of negotiations between Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, and their Chinese counterparts in London. Here's Secretary Lutnick speaking to CNBC about the deal.
We'll take off our measures, and we're in a great place with China. Really feels good. Now, President Trump's got to approve the final wording. President Xi's got to approve the final stuff. It's not really wording, it's really the deal. But both sides are really positive. I mean, I feel great about it.
According to Chinese state media, China's vice commerce minister said the talks were, quote, professional, rational, in-depth, and candid. Tensions between the U.S. and China started to spiral after President Trump announced his Liberation Day tariffs in early April. It escalated further when Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced the revocation of visas of some Chinese students, including those connected to the CCP or studying in critical fields.
So in those cases, the Chinese students weren't so good with Trump then when Rubio was revoking those things. It's hard to sometimes keep track of the tariff situation because it has changed so much. Tariffs on China under the Trump administration have gone from 20% to 54%, kept spiraling up to 145%. Now this purportedly is back down to 30%. The 55% figure that Trump is citing was clarified later by the White House to incorporate tariffs on China that had been put on during his first term. So that is what he is claiming there. To my mind, there's quite a lot of vagueness around this. I think that it is telling, perhaps, that the Trump administration was promising this plethora of trade deals, which have largely not happened. This is a general framework. The agreement with the United Kingdom was pretty limited in scope, and we haven't had finalized trade deals other than that. But the de-escalation of tariffs, I think, is broadly speaking a good thing. So if this does that, that's interesting.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, the goal, I think, ultimately with China in particular was to get them to reduce their tariffs on us by slapping heavy tariffs on them. We seem to be moving to that place, but the flip on the Chinese student visas is very troubling to me. Of course, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, in his announcement of the revocation of those visas, called this a national security threat. We've heard similar things from the FBI director, the Department of Justice, and now Trump is saying, actually, they were always good with me. Right. Well, clearly they weren't. Right. And we also just had an indictment last week of 3 Chinese nationals who were trying to smuggle biological materials into a lab at the University of Michigan. Biological materials that could cause damage to millions of acres of crops in the United States and also have health ramifications for both cattle as well as humans. And now apparently, no big deal. We're not going to screen at all.
We're all good.
Yeah, and if we had gotten a question during the press briefing yesterday, we were going to ask about this change-up, and I'll read you the question we were going to ask. Sure. We unfortunately didn't get one. But 3 Chinese nationals connected with the University of Michigan were just criminally charged with smuggling biological materials into the U.S. The president's top security officials have raised big concerns about Chinese students on American college campuses. How does the president's new agreement with China square with this administration's work thus far to safeguard American universities from CCP influence? I'd like an answer to that.
I'd have asked that question if you'd given it to me, Amber, though I wasn't down
there. Well, thank you.
I wasn't down there yesterday. But no, I mean, that's a completely valid question, and it does, I think, point to 2 things. One is these sort of shifting rationales. So on one hand, it's like, well, Chinese students are all in some fashion prone to being influenced by the CCP, and therefore we have to be careful with them. Oh, no, we don't actually. It's all good. I mean, that change is unexplained in any meaningful way. The case that you mentioned, the potential sabotage of crops, that was a really interesting case that I know we we covered it to some extent, and it got a degree of publicity, but in my mind should have got more. It was so intriguing, and they were hidden away in these little baggies because you only need a very small amount of the substance in question to wreak havoc. So that was legitimately a very interesting case. The other thing I think that the Chinese student issue goes to is the way that the trade issue has become much broader than just tariffs. So it now encompasses things like the access of Chinese students to American universities. But of course, on the other side of the equation, it now as well covers these rare minerals that China has, which are of such importance to a whole host of American industries. It seems like that was one of China's main points of leverage in these discussions. Trump has said that that is now being resolved, but to me it's just interesting that there is more of a totality of things involved in trade negotiations now. It's not really purely a tariffs negotiation.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, those rare earth minerals are really key to things like chip making, as well as electric vehicle battery making and other forms of renewable energy, which China controls a lot of the mines in Africa for those rare earth minerals, which has been a point of contention for the United States, especially as those renewable energy markets are expanding, especially on the EV front. And on the case about the agricultural potential bioweapon at the University of Michigan, China owns a lot of farmland in the United States, which has been something that Republicans have introduced bills trying to ban over the past 5 to 10 years. They've also pointed out that a lot of the farmland that China owns is close to U.S. military bases. You remember this Ukrainian drone attack that involved shipping containers where the drones were inside and they came out in Russia. There were concerns raised by security officials that China could launch a similar attack based on the land that they own near U.S. military bases that have a lot of shipping containers on them, coincidentally. So it really is a very broad issue in terms of Chinese influence in the U.S. And I do think that this particular deal seems to underplay how important some of those ancillary issues to the tariffs are.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think in relation to that as well, there is just this, I think both liberals generally and Democrats have to be wary about not getting into the situation where in the process of criticizing Trump, and I think there are many valid reasons to criticize Trump, we'll get into some of them in a second, but you don't want to move from that into downplaying the fact that the United States has real enemies and that those enemies are involved in really nefarious things. And so you do have to figure out how you guard against those, and whoever's president of the United States is somewhat beside the point to that overall broader effort.
Sure, and one of the things that Biden did that I agreed with was keeping the tariffs on China during his presidency.
Absolutely.
Up next, Bob Costas slams the mainstream media. We'll tell you why on Rising.